Hey everyone, welcome back to the studio. This week, I'm going to show you guys some concepts that have had a huge impact on my playing over the years. This stuff has to do with how we can approach playing over chord changes without worrying about the things that we typically learn from studying chord scale theory. Instead, we're going to be approaching things with another method courtesy of master educator Barry Harris. I'll show you his rules for descending dominant scales as well as a workout that you can use to practice this stuff in a ton of different configurations. Then, we'll learn about the 4 chords that are contained within each dominant and combine that with the rules for even more combinations. Finally, I'll show you guys some phrases for both major and minor 2-5-1 that combine all of this stuff so you can see how it comes together to create unique and interesting bebop lines. You guys ready? Let's get into it. Watching my videos for a bit now, you probably remember learning about Barry Harris's famous chromatic scale concept. The idea there was that we should be able to put half steps in between any note in order to resolve in any way that we want to. Now, that method worked for both ascending and descending scale lines, and it's extremely open and versatile as a way of adding chromaticism into your playing. There's lots of other ideas around how we can use chromatic notes in our lines, though. In my opinion, one of the best is another method that comes to us from Barry yet again. For those of you that have checked out the bebop scale concept, some of this might sound a little familiar, but it's really much more versatile, despite the fact that these ideas are only meant to be used for descending scale lines. See, when we descend a dominant scale, or if you're a modal thinker, the Mixolydian mode, we need to add extra half steps in order to make the resolutions work out correctly and make the right notes land on the beat. The number of half steps and where we put them changes depending on what note of the scale that we start our run from. Let's play through each rule and I'll show you what I mean. The first rule works for the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh. When we start on any of these notes, we can run down the scale, putting 1 half step in between the root and the seventh like this. Start from the third. Start from the fifth. And the seventh. That's the only rule that we end up needing for the root. The second rule works for the third, the fifth, and the seventh. And when we start on any of those pitches, we can put 3 half steps in between the third, the second and the root and the seventh. That would sound like this. Starting from the fifth and starting from the seventh. When we start on non-chord tones like the second, fourth, or the sixth, we can use Rule 3, which says no half steps. So starting from either the second, fourth, or the sixth, we can just run down the scale like this. From the fourth, and from the sixth. Lastly, as an alternative to the third rule, we can use Rule 4 on the second, fourth, or sixth as well. Now this one says to put 2 half steps between the second and the root, and then between the root and the seventh. That would sound like this. Start from the fourth, and from the sixth. The most important thing when working this stuff out is to practice them in time and practice resolving on strong beats. Once you get comfortable enough with them, you'll find that you can even combine the different rules across multiple measures, giving you even more unique combinations and points of resolution. Before we go on to other ways that we can practice these rules, check out how I practice them in order by playing each one twice and then moving up to the next note in the scale. Keep in mind, all these rules are for starting on the beat. If we start on the upbeat, then the opposite rule will apply in each case. Here's how the same exercise works, starting each rule on the upbeat. I would really recommend working this stuff out in all 12 keys, but you should at least get familiar with keys like C, F, B flat, and E flat first, before moving on and doing the rest of the circle of fifths. Up next, I'll show you guys how we can combine these rules with ascending scale runs, leaps, and triads to make even more combinations. Not to point out the obvious or anything, but there's lots more to playing good bebop lines than just descending scale runs. To help with this, I'm going to show you guys 4 different ways that we can add some ascending motion to the front of each descending scale run. First, we'll play by running up the scale to each degree and then coming down using the rule for the note that we start with. Obviously, there's a ton of combinations here, so just to not make this section too incredibly long, I'm just going to demonstrate the exercise starting from the root. You can find all the combinations in the PDF for today's lesson over at my Patreon, though. Here's that exercise now. Next, we'll play a leap of a third, starting from each degree of the scale, and then resolve down. Once we resolve, we'll again use the rule for whatever note lands on the beat and descend the scale from there, like this. If we start with the triplet, we're going to again come down the scale using the rule for the note that resolves on the beat. Here's how that works in practice. Lastly, let's start with an ascending triad from each note in the scale. We'll come down the scale after that using the rule for the last note of each triad, since that's the one that's going to land on the beat. Check out that exercise now. In the next section, we'll learn about the 4 tertiary chords that are contained within each dominant and use those to create even more combinations with the descending scale rules. When we're playing over chord changes, it's important to remember that we have many more options available to us than just the chord tones of 1, 3, 5, and 7. The notes in our lines don't have to strictly match up with the chord we're playing them over all the time. As you're finding out, what's actually most important is to resolve to one of those notes on a strong beat. Because of this, we should spend some time investigating the chords that are contained within a dominant 7. Here's what I mean. If we stack up diatonic thirds from the root of our chord, we get the plain old dominant 7th. We can do that same thing starting from the 3rd of our chord, and we get a half diminished chord that gives us the sound of the dominant 9th. This is actually going to be super important later on because it means we can use that same dominant scale over this half diminished chord as well. Stacking thirds up from the 5th gives us the minor 7. In this case, it's G minor 7. Finally, stacking thirds up from the 7th gives us a major 7 chord. In this case, that'd be B flat major 7. And it gives us the sound of a C13. Each of these 4 chords can be played in any inversion and resolve in at least 3 ways: down a step, up a step, and up a third. Now let's run through the whole scale now by running up each chord, resolving in one of those 3 directions, and then using the rule for whatever note we resolve to and descending the scale from there. We can get a little bit more mileage out of this exercise and cut a little closer to bebop phrasing by playing the chord up with a triplet off the end of one like this. Before we wrap things up for today, I want to share with you guys a couple of phrases for both major and minor 2/5 using these concepts. Before we do that though, I just want to give a quick shout out to the good people over at TrueFire.com for supporting the channel. TrueFire is an online lesson library that's host to literally thousands of courses on a wide range of musical topics from some really amazing artists and educators. With synced notation and tablature, as well as slowdown and looping features, it's super easy to follow along no matter what course you decide to pick up. While you wait for my courses to drop, you can use the link in the description or use offer code STUDIO for 35% off at checkout, and you'll also be supporting the channel at the same time. It's never been a better time to learn, practice, and play with TrueFire. Now, let's get back to the lesson and see how we can combine all of today's material into a few phrases that we can play over major and minor 2/5s. Each of these lines are going to be using only things I've taught you today, so you can see how it all comes together to work over some common chord changes. For the major 2/5 examples, I'm just thinking about G7 scale and then resolving to some chord tone of C. Here's two phrases for you to check out how that works. For minor 2/5, I'm still thinking about G7 scale over the B half diminished, because remember, the B half diminished is contained within a G7. Over E7, we'll use the E7 scale and resolve to a chord tone of A minor 7 or A minor 6. Check out those phrases now. Thanks for sticking around all the way to the end of today's video. Like I said at the beginning, there's tons of ways to think about adding chromaticism to your bebop lines, and despite going through a ton of stuff today, I really only scratched the surface of how you can make use of these ideas. Let me know down in the comments if there are any other methods that you found helpful to understanding how to add chromaticism into your playing. Next week, we're going to expand on this topic by learning about the family of 4 dominants and how we can use these half-step rules in combination with that to make even more interesting combinations. As always, if you found today's lesson helpful, make sure you give the video a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that bell for notifications too. If you want to get access to a PDF for today's material, along with the whole back catalog for all the videos on my channel, you can get that for as little as $10 a month over at my Patreon page, or by just hitting that join button right here on YouTube. A special thanks goes out to Milan de Kaiser and Ron Maestas for being studio fans. I really appreciate the support. An extra special thanks is due to these studio members for their support as well. PH, David Zuckerbraun, Max Irwin, Everton Armstrong, Stephen Schwartz, Aaron Walters, Stephen Prager, Louis Rosen, Zé Soares, Michael LeBroy, Carl Jackson, David Wertman, Aldo Fonseca, and Jesse Cable. An extra special shout out to Jazz Luminaire patron Bill Jacob. Thank you guys all so much for your continued support. I'm David Shore, and thanks again for hanging out with me here at the studio today. I'll see you guys next time.